Alright, today's video is about optical flow sensor, installing it on a Cx20. I had it installed on the original APM, the version 252 board, but it's just too problematic. If anything screws up, the quadcopter would most likely go into a suicide roll and flip and just crash. So I'm just going to skip that part totally. It is possible to install it on it. It's just until I find the trace to cut and change the volts to 3 volts instead of the 5 volts, or maybe do something. Anyways, it has to be modded regardless. So this is basically on the APM 2.6 and up for basically any quadcopter, but I am using a Cx20 remote control. The firmware 3.21, I had to mod it to make it work because it wasn't logging it. And it's not enabled. I'm not sure if the original one is actually enabled, but it doesn't log it anyway, so it's really hard to tell if it truly is working. The next part of this video I'm going to be jumping into is showing you the trace you have to cut. The video might jump around a little bit because I had to splice it all together to make it work out. And that's it. So we'll jump on to this video now.
Alright, I got the APM 2.8 taken apart. This will be the same for the 2.6, etc. Okay, my goal right now is to get after this trace right here. I have to cut this trace here and then put a solder blob from this pad to this pad. So first, usually a sharp screwdriver is probably better. Okay. Alright, it is cut. Now we'll put a blob. Just be careful on these pads, you don't want to heat them up too much. I find in life too, when you want a solder blob, it doesn't happen, but if you're soldering on something and you don't want that jump to happen, it always happens. So you might have to stick a piece of metal here instead. Oh, there you go, it worked. Alright, so that's done. So now we have 3 volts. Alright, back from prepping the board. I'm going to leave the APM out of the quadcopter for now, just so it's easier for you guys to understand where the wires go and everything without looking at the rest of the rat nest I have going on. Here's the optical flow sensor. It says it's a 3D robotics, but who really knows? The cables. Seems they had a over surplus of these cables. They all say the same thing. They all say power LED. So we'll have to do one cable at a time because there's absolutely no color coding on this one. Okay, so the first one we're going to get after is the clock, S clock, and that's the second pin here. And this guy plugs up on the one that says S clock on this, so that'd be 4 up. Next wire is, I believe, Mossy, whatever you kids call it these days. That's right next door to that guy. And this one plugs right beside him. Next one's MISO. Doop doop. Goes right there. And he plugs next in line. And don't worry, because it is actually labeled right here as well. So the next one will be A3. So keep in mind it always starts with 0. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3. And the last two is your positive and your negative. Now don't get too confused here because it says it's a switch rail, the negative rail and the positive rail. These last two rows is just for this port here. So the top one is actually your ground. And that guy plugs right at the top. Got a nice little dog hair. And then your positive. Again, you're going to see this negative side and think something's wrong, but don't worry. This is where it goes. The bottom is your positive. This one, guys, this guy gets plugged in the second one. You'll hear about 3 volts and 5 volts. That's the mod we just did, or we didn't do a mod, but that's the trace we had cut on the bottom of the board. Don't get that confused with the 5 volt power in this board and the 3 volts. It's different. Okay, so that's that. I have to take off this cap. Now we're going to be jumping into software.
Alright, download my optical flow file. Not sure what the name will be. It'll probably be opticalflow.zip or something like that off my Google Drive or wherever I might find to put it. Extract it. I included all the files I believe you should need. If not, I apologize. But I tested in a virtual machine and it should be the only ones you actually need to get it going. So the first thing you want to do is install the Python. Use the default location. Sure, why not? It's already there. Next, install the serial drivers or the serial module, whatever it may be. It should, if you use the default for the last one, my back one here, it should be the default for this one as well. It's all good. Open up Mission Planner. Go to Initial Setup, install firmware. Right, click on Load Custom Firmware. The extracted files included this file here. Write this one. Don't write my file yet. Okay, so you're done with Mission Planner. Close that down. This Pi here, open up him, just double click on him. If it just opens and shuts, that means you didn't install the serial. Choose the port your quadcopter's on. Mine, I believe, is on 6. And click Open. Alright, so there it is. The first thing you're going to want to probably do is adjust the motion. Or the images, I mean. You can set the frame rate and the resolution to the max if you want. I believe I followed the code in Mission Planner or in the firmware. It looks like their goal was to automatically set it, but I'm not too sure because there's 2 options. One if you have it set to 400 and one if you have it set to 1600. I haven't followed it far enough to see, and on the wiki it says nothing about actually changing it, so maybe it's best just to leave everything at its defaults. So if you push the small I, you should get 1 single picture, and then if you keep it on the capital I and then push send, it'll do a continuous pictures. So this is where you'll want to adjust the lens. Just point it at a window or something, probably would be the best thing. Alright, there's my nice little happy face. And he will be an angry happy face. Alright, so now if you want to test your motion, you have to unplug it. Just close this down. And then reopen it again. Plug in your APM. Again, choose the COM port 6. Open. So this time we want motion, so it's M. And send. I'll move this guy over just a little bit. And now if you swipe your finger up, you'll notice it changed to, we'll stick on the X side on 4. So again, I moved it in the up direction, so it should keep counting that way. So now if I bring my finger down, it'll count backwards. And then the other one, if you swipe left or right, it's counting up. Well, if my hand wasn't so big. And it's working.
Alright, I just wanted to show you guys this too before I jump into the software. I put the pins forward as it says in the description on a wiki. So I see on some people's videos where they're testing the optical, the pins are actually the other way. So I'm not sure who's right, me or them, but I put the pins forward. You can always try reversing it anyways, it's not going to do anything harmful anyways. For now I just ran the wires like this really bad. Just to see if it works or not. If I enjoy the optical flow, I'll wire it up better, but most likely I'm just going to be taking this off anyways because I'm not too impressed with the optical flow. And yeah, that's it. And again, there's my nice fancy hot glue.
Alright, after you have all the optical tested out and tuned, open up Mission Planner again, and you'll want to go to your firmware. I don't think you'll want to try my firmware first. It's better to try it with 3.15, and if you feel up to it, then you could try mine. I do have the gimbal, and I have auto tuning disabled just in case any corruption happens. But anyways, you go back to your initial setup, install firmware, and pick a previous version. And this time pick 3.15 under the list here. So this one's fine. After that, then click on this guy here, let it finish up, and then you'll want to go to, I believe, initial setup. Oh, I'll connect it. Alright, go to your initial setup, go to optional hardware, optical flow, put a check mark in optical flow. You can go to your mandatory hardware and flight modes. So here it's RTL, alt hold, stabilize, stabilize, loiter. And for flight mode 6, change that to OF loiter. And then save your modes. Under config and tuning, just to make, depending on what version you have, but look for flow enabled, and just make sure it's 1, and then write your parameter. Okay, so we're done with this part. Now you'll want to go to terminal. Also in 3.15, you can't go through this guy here. You'll get an error. With 3.21 or my firmware, this is where you have to go to look at the logs. So you want to click on terminal. Also on 3.21, I'm not too sure if anybody actually is really using it Like with my firmware, I had to enable the opflow, and also for logging, I had to set a bit in there, or not set a bit, but I had to change something in there as well so it would actually log properly. Otherwise, you would get no logs. Regardless, you have to do this step first in here, and then change it to 3.21 or my version to actually see the logs, because it's disabled by default. So here you'll want to connect. If you want to test the op flow, most people would just type, you go to test and op flow, and most likely you're just going to get all zeros. I just use a fast light again when I'm just messing around, and I'll get nothing here. So push enter, exit, go to setup, and then I believe op flow off, then type op flow on, then type exit, go to test, and type op flow again. Let's spell it right. And now with the flashlight under it again, I'm getting all this data now. Okay, so it's working. Just push enter to exit it. Also in your flight data, I haven't got the source code for Mission Planner yet. I might look into that next, because I believe it'd probably be an easy fix. Under status, and here, it's always going to show 0. So the only way right now to see if anything's really working when you're flying it is to use the logs. And that's what I enabled in my version as well. So for this time, go back to terminal again. All right, back in terminal again. Now you're going to want to type logs, LOGS. And here you'll notice it doesn't say opflow. And that was the problem with version 3.21 as well, is even if you want to look at the logs, by default it's not enabled, and you can't get to the terminal with version 3.21. So you have to go to version 3.15, enable it this way, and upgrade to my firmware or the stock 3.21 firmware to test it out. So now all you have to do is type enable opflow. And you'll notice now at the end, it's going to say opflow. So now when you do your test flights, it's going to log this. After you're all done, you'll want to most likely disable this if you want to. But anyways, so now take your quadcopter outside or inside your house or whatever you want to do. Test it. Make sure you put your remote control on, I believe it's on SWB would be 0, and SWA, set it to 1. And then that'll enable your op flow. After you're done that, open up Mission Planner again. Go to this here. If you're on version 3.15, you have to do it through here. My version 3.21 or the stock 3.21, you have to do it through the other part. But anyways, click on log download, and then click on your logs. It's best to do one flight with the lens cap off, and then bring your quadcopter down to the ground, and then put the cap back on it again, and do another test flight. I'm going to download these, which are already downloaded. I'm just going to show you what it looks like in the logs and how to see. Alright, so you can close that down. Then go to your log browser and find the 2 files. So here's my 2 and 3. And I'll show you 3 first. I believe that's with the cap off. So now in here you're going to notice you're going to have an OF one. So click on the DX and the DY. and you're going to notice it's just a flat line. You can actually right click here if you want to and filter just the OF, and here you'll see it's all zeros, and that's with the cap. Right, so now I'll try 2. So I'm going to load a log. I'll go to my number 2. These were really small test flights just in my living room. I'll go back to OF again. And then now you're going to see some movement happening. Not very much because it was a small flight. And then I go to OF. And here you'll see a couple of changes once in a while. So I believe the firmware is still pretty buggy at least, or the unit, the optical flow thing I got is maybe screwed up a bit. But I don't notice any difference with the cap on and the cap off. People say that when you fly it, it'll just start going to the right. So I believe what's happening is maybe it's not resetting the sensor, or just kind of stuck in some kind of loop. Some of the firmware I notice is just left. Like it looked like they had a goal to actually be able to set the they did some defines where you were able to mount the optical in different positions, but that's all there is like 6 defines, but there's actually nothing calling it or anything like that after that, at least the firmware I'm looking at, unless I'm looking at it wrong. And that's it, guys. That's how you get that. I'll show you my firmware quickly, I guess, how to install that. So you want to go to initial setup, download my firmware, put it somewhere. I made my firmware small. Like I said, I took out the gimbal and I took out the auto tune, because I noticed if the firmware is a little too big, it actually writes over the boot sector, which basically bricks your APM. And that'll be my next video, is how to recover a bricked APM from the original APM and the new one. So here you just go load custom firmware. Download my firmware somewhere. Here's mine here. It's going to start right away. It's really important right now is if you're ever uploading custom firmware and you get a verification error, do not unplug your quadcopter. Right away, just as soon as it's done, click OK on the error and then click on this guy here. Just re-upload version 3.21 and don't even bother trying the custom firmware again. Alright, so it's all good, no errors. So now you can connect. So up here, this is what I meant about the tag. So now you'll know it's actually loaded with my firmware. And that's it. So on this version here, when you're going to want to download the logs, you want to go to Data Flash. And just click on this guy here now. And then here's the logs here now. Alright, hopefully this was helpful. I'm not really too impressed with the optical flow. I'm not sure. I have lots of projects always on the go. I had to learn how to build this firmware and edit it and everything like that. So I might actually look more into it because it is interesting. I followed some of the code and some of it to me seems broken, or I just don't understand it because I'm a little new to it. And that's it. If you upload my firmware and it bricks your APM, don't blame me. Just take a warning. Like I said, just be careful. If you do get an error on verification, just upload a different version right away. And that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.